Sam.
Hey, Giuseppe.
Ciao.
Pepe.
You said it well, Pepe. Yes. It's me.
Okay. I haven't seen Sam or Tim yet here.
So they were literally just on a call with me that we hung
Okay.
up to come here. So they may be like taking a quick bio break. But the last thing we said was, okay, see each other on the OAuth call. So they will be here.
Thanks, Heather. Okay. We're still waiting for Sam and Tim, so. They're gonna be presenting this. Let's see. Okay, see Tim. Hey, Tim. Still waiting for Sam. Tim,
Hey,
will you be presenting, or is it Sam you'll be presenting, or is it both of you? Can you hear me, Tim? Can't.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can.
Perfect. Sorry.
So I haven't seen Sam yet.
Yeah, he's just trying to get his account figured out. So I don't think we need to wait for him if you don't want.
Okay, so you could start us here. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, let's get going then. Thank you all for joining. Let's start with the not well here. The not well applies here as usual. So which this governs everything that we do at the IETF. So if you're not familiar with this, please make sure you are familiar with this. So here's our schedule for today. Tim and Sam will be talking about FedCM. Next week, we'll have OAuth 2.1 update. The week after that, same day and same time, attestation-based client authentication. The week after that, there will be no meeting on the 28th because of Identiverse. 1 week after that, June 4th, we'll be talking about PICA. And then June 11th, we'll be talking about those three documents that talks about revocation. So that's our schedule. So today, our focus is FedCM. Okay. Any questions? Doesn't see the slide, or can you guys see my slide?
No, it just says it's being started.
I can see the slides. Rifat,
Yeah.
I think you have to look at you open up the slide window.
Yeah, I have a notification that a screen is being shared, but I'm not actually seeing anything.
Okay. Let me.
Yeah, I
me
was thinking it
stop.
was my end.
You're
if
you're
people are saying
coming
it's-
very soft, Justin. But let me stop sharing. Let me see if I can try again. I'll try my entire screen and see if that helps. Can you see now?
I can see it.
Yes, it's working now.
Okay. Okay. So then I'll go back to the not well here just to make sure we covered the not well here. So again, make sure you're familiar with this because this is applicable here. So it's really important that you understand the implication of the not well here. And here is our schedule. Again, I'm not going to go through it again, but today we'll be talking about FITCM, and we have the same meeting happening in the coming few weeks, with the exception of May 28th at the same time, at the same day, right? Okay, that's all I have. Any questions, comments about this? If not, I will hand it to Tim and Sam. Hey, Sam, thanks for joining.
All right, sorry. How do I share my screen here?
You have that at the bottom there. You have the third one from the left, share screen.
Do you see my screen then? Because I clicked that.
Nope. It's coming.
It's like raising my hand. Is that what it's supposed to do?
No.
Like it says stop screen share. No, when I click it again, ask to screen share, and then it's raising my hand.
Yeah,
It says
you need
screen
to-
requested.
Yeah.
Oh, I need to approve it, I think. Let me see.
Yeah.
Hold on.
As long as you're logged in as chair, you should have a separate control for that.
Hold on 1 second, guys.
I see a message saying a new deck is being shared, but it's
Yeah.
just an icon.
It says select your slide. I can't share my screen. It has to be a document. How does this work?
Oh, so you as sharing screen and sharing slides are two separate controls here,
Right.
Tim. Meet Echo, because sharing it's actually super clever. I'll explain it later. You'll actually love how it works, but the UI is confusing. So you want to request share screen.
Yeah, it's the third button from the left.
Yeah, that's the one I've been using. I didn't click share slides. I clicked share screen.
Can you send me your slides and I'll share it from here? If that doesn't work.
Sure. It goes against everything I stand for to be the guy that says next slide, but I guess I have to. There's no other way to do this. Like, sorry, it drives me crazy. There's no way to share screen here.
Oh, hold on. Can you try now?
Yeah, it just says select slides. All right, I guess I will send you the
Wasn't there briefly sort of for us, you ask for a presentation and it basically pops up with us and we just approve it? I don't see that button anymore. Like,
right,
I
but
see a request coming in.
I just passed. Okay. I just passed the slide control to you, Tim. See if that helps.
But it says Tim asked to share the screen, but I don't know how to permit that.
All right, I'll just send you the slides.
Okay.
All right, it's in the chat.
Where did you put it? Sorry.
In the chat.
Okay. Let's see. Okay.
Does this assume I can't do the demo? Because I need to share my screen for that. We'll have to skip over that, I guess.
Okay. So let me. So download it.
While he's doing that, just out of curiosity, I hit ask for slides this time. Did that do screen share? Is it opposite for some reason?
I don't see anything here, so give me 1 second here. Document.
Are you done your meeting? Mom's drinking coffee. Come out when you're done.
Can you see my screen now, guys?
Yeah. Can you go into presenter mode?
What's that?
Can you go in? Is this presentation mode or?
Let me see. Full screen. There you go. Can you see it?
Yeah, it's not full screen, but I guess is this the best we can do?
Yep, that's full screen.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead and go to the next slide.
Oh, it's not working. Shoot. Oh gosh, it's not working. It's not.
Do we have to use Meet Echo? Can we just send out another link or?
Yeah, maybe. Shoot. My entire screen. Try this one. Oh, can you see it now?
Yeah, that's good.
Perfect.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. So hi everyone, I'm Tim Capali from Okta. I work on standards there, and joining me is Sam from Google, who is one of the the original authors of FedCM. So this, if you are at OSW, we honestly repurposed a lot of the deck here. If you want the full deck, the link is there. We did pull out a lot of the background because there's just not enough time. So if you want to see the the background on bounce tracking and all the fun stuff, and also some more alternative capabilities like storage access and those things, those will be in the that full deck there. So you can grab that. All right, next slide. All right, so we'll do a super quick why. Like I said, we're not going to be able to go through all of the history here, but just a couple of bullets on how we got here. Next slide, and you'll probably want to just animate this through. Okay, perfect. Third-party cookies and link decoration, and then both of those together with redirects, all kind of enable passive tracking of users across the web, right? Like there's various ways they're used together, but at the end of the day, it's pretty easy prior to some of the deprecations that have come to actually passively track the user across sites, iframes, redirects, bounces. The example I like to use is, if you click on an affiliate link, a deal link, right? If you actually watch your dev tools, right, it probably hops through 5 or 6 different sites, and it's either passing a bunch of query parameters or, embedding an iframe and sharing an identifier via a third-party cookie, right? So super easy to track users, not good. There's been a lot of efforts for the past couple of years to get rid of this, right? So third-party cookies are already either deprecated or their deprecation has been announced in all major browsers. And so that means bounce tracking and link decoration become the next area of focus. So while many identity flows don't have a hard dependency on third-party cookies. They all have a heavy dependency on link decoration and some form of redirects. So a lot of the things that broke with third-party cookies are nice to haves in many cases, with the exception of maybe iframe-based token refresh. But things like logout, there are alternative ways to do logout, such as backchannel logout. The browser, the user agent, the web platform is in a very unique position to assist with these identity flows without bringing tracking back, right? So this effort kind of started as like, how can the browser help here in the least intrusive way possible to help maintain these identity flows without also rewriting all the identity related specs. So trying to find a balance between eliminating tracking and allowing these flows to continue. So that's kind of the background. We spent almost 40 minutes on just the background at OSW. So take a look at that deck, the original deck, if you want some more details there. Go ahead to the next slide. So we'll talk about now what is FedCM and how does it work. Next slide. So at its highest level, it is a web platform API, right? And that is somewhat new from an OpenID Connect, OAuth, and SAML perspective, right? It's always been an over-the-top solution. It's been using existing primitives, and so this is an attempt to take advantage of things that the web platform offers, such as APIs, right? And not relying on brittle primitives that have a tendency to go away and can be used for all the bad things we just talked about. So in this case, right, the identity federation flow starts from the RP, and like in most cases today, the user consents to use an IDP account. The browser sends requests to the IDP endpoints directly, and the browser returns an assertion back to the RP. That's a very, very high level. We're going to go through all of these. But the big thing is these interactions are done without disclosing who and from where until the user consents. That's the biggest, if the biggest takeaway I would say from today is that this is all about just ensuring the user is consenting that these two parties should talk to each other. That's the biggest piece, right? Without that, it's unsanctioned tracking, right? Like the user needs to know what's going on. So go ahead and flip to the next slide.
Actually, can I make a question?
Sure.
So some flows start at the RP, but IDP initiated flows are important in a lot of business scenarios. When both of you and I were at Microsoft, when we went to get our W-2 from ADP, Microsoft would initiate a IDP-initiated SAML flow to ADP requesting the W-2 containing the login information. And there's a number of, and this works in Connect too. So I guess my question is, what is the plan for IDP-initiated flows? Because business scenarios need it.
Yeah, if we could table that, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question. So if I can get through, and then we'll talk about that at the end.
That's fine. I'm just questioning what you said on the slide.
Sure, fair enough. Yeah, the bullet point is probably a little bit too generic. So if you go to the next slide, there's a quick visual. Since we're not going to be able to do a live demo, this is unfortunate. This is probably the best we can do. Hopefully that right-hand one animates. Maybe you have to click. Okay, guess not. So you can imagine
an animation.
Yeah, sorry, this is all broken apparently. So on the left-hand side on the desktop, right, you do get an iframe-like modal that is being presented by the browser, even though it looks like it might be coming from, it's below the browser bar. But that in this case has a single account, but that could also have multiple accounts, and it could also in the future have multiple accounts from multiple IDPs, right? So it's very flexible. This example just uses a single account. And on the right-hand side, what you should have seen is essentially a modal pop up from the bottom, looking very similar to the frame on the left, with a continue as ye button, just like you see on the left. So this is all live, right? So you can actually, the best example we use is booking.com. You go to booking.com in Chrome on Android right now, you'll see the slide up come up, and you'll see that experience in production. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, so what does the API look like, right? It is from the RP's perspective very simple to deploy. That was a design goal from day one, right? Like where can we put the most lift on users, right? I'm sorry, on RPs versus users versus the browser versus other parties, right? And the W3C operates on the premise that like users should take the least brunt of these efforts, and the user agent should try to take the most brunt if possible, right? So in this case, it is very simple. If you're familiar with WebAuthn, this should probably look very familiar. Just a bunch of different options here. Navigator credentials get, identity, and then you pass in essentially a small set of parameters for a provider, right? So in this case, this is the IDP's config URL, a client ID, and a nonce, and it's a promise, and you get back a token from the response. So we'll dive deeper into all these, but that's the very, very high level. Go ahead to the next slide. So for the requirements of the RP, as I mentioned, it's designed to be simple. They need to check for FedCM support and then call navigator credentials get instead of initiating a redirect, right? So a lot of the things you would stuff into a redirect, you stuff into this API call, into the object, and away you go. But if we flip to the next slide, the IDP requirements are where a lot of the complexity come in, because one IDP has, is going to serve a lot of relying parties. So that's where a lot of the changes have occurred. So if we run through like what a sequence would be, and this is an animator, unfortunately. So if you want to just get as far as you can before it changes, yeah. So relying party on the left, right, and this is the JavaScript in the browser calls the navigator credential get that I just showed. At this point, there's essentially two requests that come from the browser, and so this is the browser itself, right? So this is the browser doing it on behalf of the user. And it calls essentially a well-known endpoint that allows us to bind these to essentially the configuration URL to a top-level domain, which is important. And we'll talk about why all these calls exist in a second. And then we actually get a configuration, and that configuration file says, here's all the branding parameters, here's the name, here's essentially the customization options that you have. And this is all before the user has really seen anything. And that's an important point, which we'll talk about what kind of information is shared at this phase. The response goes back, right? In the well-known file, you have essentially a reverse mapping to the config. And then in the config file, as I mentioned, you have a list of endpoints plus all of the branding information. So go ahead to the next slide. And yeah, just go ahead through that. Okay. So at this point, the browser actually will then fetch accounts, right? So the IDP, essentially, this is now a credentialed request. The IDP will say, hey, these are the accounts that are valid for that session. And at that point, after that response, the browser can essentially pop up an account chooser. And I'm skipping some steps deliberately because there's no good way to present this. But go ahead and skip to the next slide. Let's actually go into the individual requests. I think it's more helpful. So all of these different endpoints get defined by the IDP, right? So as I mentioned, the design philosophy, won't cover that again. Well-known endpoint, a config endpoint, a accounts endpoint, client metadata, and identity assertion endpoint, right? So some of these are static, some of these are dynamic based on the session. Go ahead to the next slide. The well-known endpoint, as I mentioned, is just designed to be essentially a static mapping. But the big thing, the first bullet point, there's no cookies, no origin, and no refer, right? So the IDP is not aware of where this request is coming from. It's not credentialed, there's no cookies. And that allows this to happen without the RP and IDP having a correlation, right? The reason this is the way it is because the Apex domain can be challenging to update, right? So that's why this is static. There's no dynamic data in this endpoint because many organizations can only make a change to update this well-known very infrequently, if ever, right? So this is designed to be static, one and done. And then on the next one, we should talk about the config endpoint, which is a little bit more dynamic. So you'll notice this is also no cookies, no origin, no refer. And another detail is this one also doesn't follow redirects beyond ETLD+1. This is what provides kind of the first stage of a mapping for the user agent to actually be able to handle the rest of the flow, right? So there's multiple endpoints, as I mentioned, and the branding, right? And this is designed to be super flexible to allow you to customize the widgets and the flow, all the things that the browser is going to present in browser Chrome, to colors, icons, the name. You might have a different user-friendly name than the URL, for example. So that is where that all comes from, as you saw in the screenshot. Brian, Apex, as far as I know, it's a well-known term. It's essentially the root domain is known as the Apex. If there's a better word for it, I'm happy to update the slide deck. Go ahead to the next slide. All right, so this is the first request. The account endpoint is the first request that has cookies, right? And it's going to be the IDP's cookies, right? So this is how the browser can say, hey, do you actually have any active sessions for this user, which, you know, the user is essentially tied to the cookie. There is still no origin, no referrer, and it doesn't follow redirects, right? So you still don't know where the request is coming from, because at this point, remember, the user has not seen anything, right? There's been no consent granted, right? So there's the IDP, all it knows is there's a cookie, and these are the sessions that are valid, and that's about it. There's nothing else to correlate back to the browser session. So go ahead to the next one. This next one is metadata. So client metadata endpoint. There are no cookies on this one because there's no need to be. The origin is passed, right? Because, you know, you may need to know a specific privacy policy, specific terms of service for that relying party, right? So when you register like a client ID, you typically have to put these values in during manual registration. Same concept here. The goal is to be able to provide context in the selector for the user, that, you know, this is the terms of service of what I'm signing, you know, this is the provider I'm using to sign in, and what the privacy policy is, et cetera. And if you, it was hard to see on the original screenshot, but you'll actually see that in the text on the button. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, this is where this is essentially the end of the flow, right? So once the user, between the last slide and this slide, the user is now seeing a pop-up, right? A slide up, a little window in the desktop browser, whatever it may be. And at this point, they have selected an account, right? And so let's just say in this example is for idp.example. That then becomes a the user is consented, right? So that becomes a post request to the assertion endpoint that is credentialed. It passes the origin, and the response is today you know, you can respond back with a token, and that is an opaque value, right? It is not introspected. It is effectively a string, and that's one of the open questions for both this group and for the OpenID Foundation, is like, we need to probably wrap some semantics around what type of token it is, and some of the, you know, essentially we need a profile to run over this API. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But this is essentially what you get back today. We'll talk about some new things that might be coming to allow you to pass back some additional things here. So if you map out the endpoints to the different all the different pieces out, right, well known to the config file, all the different endpoints, and ultimately a series of accounts back to the account endpoint, right? So a user that has, you know, I'll use Microsoft as an example, right? They have one big common endpoint. You might have like 7 different accounts with an active session at that endpoint because it serves multiple tenants and other things, right? So for many services, an average user is probably only going to have one, but there are cases where the user may have multiple accounts. So go ahead to the next slide. Skip that. Sorry, that was supposed to be hidden. Ignore that slide. All right, and the last one is, how do you actually sever the relationship between these two parties, right? It's not quite logout, but it's kind of like getting close to that idea, right? So how do you actually say, you know, the user just wants to kind of forget this relationship and kind of start that process again the next time they come back? This is kind of the disconnect endpoint, right? So it is credentialed because, again, the user had consented before. The origin is passed because it's important to know where the request is coming from. And it's as simple as passing the config URL that you use to sign in, the client ID, and an account hint, which helps you guide, you know, similar to in Connect, right? There's a hint. It just helps you, you know, select the right session. In theory, that would be bound to the cookie, but you can also send a hint via that parameter. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, I guess we can't do the demo, so skip that. So as I mentioned, you can go to booking.com on your phone and try it in Chrome. That's probably the easiest way. And if we can figure out how to do it at the end, we will do that. So let me pause before we go into the status. Are there any specific questions about like the API structure, the flows, before I get into kind of the status of the work?
Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I'm not very smart, so I maybe didn't follow some things, but bear with my questions here. The well-known file points to a config file at the IDP? Is that, sorry, that's sort of a statement and a question. I see Sam nodding. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. I was just, yeah, if you can go back. Yeah.
What is the config URL then that is passed in the initial request from in the API?
They are the same, and so the config file actually is that value over there. The reason we have the well-known file is such that we can guarantee that there's no decoration in that URL itself. So there's an attack that was identified by Firefox that said, well, here's one way in which this API can be attacked. You can pass the, like you can put in the URL, you can put the RP's name, the RP origin, and that would actually make the credential requests with that entropy there. And so by having it in the well-known file, you remove entropy from that specific URL, and you guarantee that it doesn't have RP-specific information. So it's not used for, so point being that it's not used for discovery of that URL. It's used for guaranteeing that it doesn't have the RP's name. And I'll send the link to the specific attack that was identified and why it was introduced.
I sort of remember seeing some messages on that, but so the RP has to know the config file.
Yeah.
URL in advance.
Yeah, it could technically discover it from the well-known file, because the well-known file has that URL, so you could technically discover from it. It's also publicly available, the well-known file, so you could fetch it and parse it. But yes, today the API does require you to pass that URL into the JavaScript call.
Yeah, and I'll add, I think is essentially up until some new incubation work, right? This is assuming that the RP is going to have support a series of providers because they need to know how to validate the response, right? So some of the things that came out of OSW were like, okay, well, what if we don't pass a config URL? Could that mean do some type of accept any IDP, right? So that's kind of future work stream, but right now it's kind of under the status quo of like taking the NASCAR list and a pre-config and making it more dynamic.
Okay, I guess I'm missing sort of, it feels like this knowledge presupposed and then also discovered, and it's probably just my lack of understanding overall.
If I can jump in, Brian, think of it more like a verification, not discovery. So it's like you start with a config, and this well-known thing is a verification that config is owned by.
Right, and just about that request, this get well-known web identity, that's happening by the browser, not your RP code in the front end.
Yeah, but it's as a result of the RP invoking the API.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, I'll have to wrap my head around that a little bit more. But along the same lines of maybe my misunderstanding, the RP metadata or whatever client metadata is a file hosted at the IDP.
Correct. Yeah, okay. If you go. So there's the config. Sorry, which one? This is the one you're worried about? You're asking about?
Yeah, client metadata endpoint. This is, I see the host here is idpexample.com. So it's just a little.
This also threw me for a loop when I was first reading this. Think of this as because clients are registered at the IDP, it's the IDP providing that information back to the browser. But it assumes that this is the metadata that is registered by the client
at the IDP for this IDP. Client. Okay, that helps. Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Steve.
There we go. Hi, guys. Actually, I think I may have answered my own question. I was asking about the threat modeling that you've done so far, both the threats against security compromise and also privacy compromise, if you will. But it looks like you've got a fair amount of write-up on it in the draft spec. So I'll go through that, come back to it later.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Steve, sorry. Hannes?
I hope you can hear me.
We can.
Okay. I was wondering whether in the course of the presentation you could specifically brainstorm a little bit about the impact on the OAuth specifications, because for some of the stuff or some of the work in OAuth, we've been heavily focused on the redirect functionality. And so going forward, how is this work going to impact and like in your view? So that's something I would like to get away with at the end of the interim meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's, we were hoping to leave some time at the end. There's a slide that kind of asks a few questions. So yeah. All right, let me go through real quick kind of where this work is at, and then we can continue on to the discussion. So yeah, go ahead, pass that. So essentially this work started, if you're not familiar with the W3C, a lot of work starts in W3C in some form of a community group. It's a way to incubate ideas under some level of protection and, you know, some structure that provides organizations the ability to participate. And so that's where, you know, FedCM lives today. That's where the early spec work happened, and you know that's where, you know, the link to the documents will take you. Just 2 months ago, we did form a new working group, which is the destination for this work. So that has not yet kicked off, but we are hoping that work will kick off in June. There'll probably be a face-to-face kickoff and all that fun stuff. And the goal is, you know, with the working group is to take that to W3C recommendation track, which is, you know, the W3C equivalent of proposed standard in IETF. If you are curious about those groups, there's 2 links at the top, one for the CG, one for the working group. The CG will remain and will be paired, for lack of a better term, to the working group, so that folks that aren't W3C members can more openly participate in the discussions. Go ahead to the next slide. In terms of implementation status, this first shipped in Chrome 108, the kind of the initial feature set. So everything we just talked about is there in Chrome 108. It also shipped in Edge. I cannot remember the exact version, but it's been there for a bit of time. In Firefox, it is there behind a feature flag. It is not quite up to date with the latest changes, but it's close. So you can play with it. And all we can say for Safari is they have publicly stated they're supportive of this work. There's a link to their statement there at the bottom. Go to the next slide. A quick look at kind of what's next, right? And a lot of this actually came out of discussions in the CG, and then there'll be a few that came from OSW. So the first one is, and this one might seem silly, but right now we can't support multiple IDPs, right? And the reason for that is it's actually very challenging to make multiple calls at the same time and have them kind of come up in the same consistent manner for users, right? Like we can't have you don't want things popping in and jumping out. And many of these larger identity providers use SDKs, right? So it's not even just the relying party directly calling, it's an embedded SDK, and then they all fight, and then, you know, you have to populate this nice thing for the user. So there's a lot of open questions on this, but it is actively being worked on. You know, 3 of the top questions, right? Like, when do you actually show the selection UI? Do you delay by a second? And you know, those seconds count, right? As we all know, users drop off. Which order should they be loaded? Should they be randomized? Should it be last used? Make sure no one's playing favorites. And then, you know, how should new providers that load late, should they just like kind of pop into the list? Should there be an overflow? So a lot of mix of UX and technical challenges there. But the idea to start is that the first experiment is to allow multiple providers in a single GET call, right? So as long as it's the same, for lack of a better term, party on the page making a call, you can start playing with this. It's just the, you know, multiple gets from different places that is being worked on today. So this one is exciting. This is kind of the first step of, you know, making the NASCAR page go away and be more dynamic in a contextually aware dialogue like the FedCM modal. So go ahead to the next slide. This one is particularly exciting. Can you move the little sharing thing, Rifat, if it's not a pain?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So this one's exciting. This one probably got the most conversation going at OSW. The idea here that, right, if you go to an IDP and you do something, wouldn't it be great if the IDP could say, hey, like register to the browser as an IDP, so that when the user goes somewhere else, they're kind of already you have a session with the IDP and you can show up in the dialogue, right? So this is very powerful. This is really what enables this seamless experience that is desired, right? That the user has kind of made their selection, and it let's say would maybe ask the user, if you go to the next slide real quick, maybe it'll pop up and say, hey, do you want to allow this site to if you want to allow this site to, that's a very, very rough mock-up, allow this site to help you log into websites, right? And maybe that's something you can also manage in settings. There's multiple ways this could be addressed in UX, but the goal is that when you visit the IDP, they can essentially actively ask you if you would like to use this provider to sign in the future on other sites. So if you want to go back again, sorry. So very, very simple call. The nice thing here for the relying party, I think I was hinting at this to Brian, is this is where we have the opportunity to say, hey, like as a relying party, I will accept any IDP that speaks X, right? And the speaks X is the thing we need to talk. That's one of the next steps of like, how do we make sure when you say any, you actually will understand the response. Might be as simple as adding a protocol field. We'll have to talk about that, but the idea here is that any registered provider would now show up in the selection box without the RP having to be explicitly aware of it. And so that kind of gets us back closer to the dream of like OpenID2 and Discovery and WebFinger and all the fun things that that haven't necessarily surfaced in the past or haven't been able to be usable by users in the past. So I think that inches us closer there. So this is, as Sam put in the chat, this is an early implementation, right? So this needs feedback. If you can even do a prototype, that helps even more. I believe I didn't have the link. We'll add the link in chat after. Or Sam, do you have the link to the? Yeah, thank you. All right, go to the next one. One more, yeah. So this is along the same path, right? Of what if I don't have a session with the IDP? How do we like provide a nice user experience to have the user do that initial sign in, right? And so this is called button mode, right? And you'll see it's in modal dialog presented by the browser, and it essentially allows for that graceful degradation when the user doesn't have a session, right? Whether they never had a session or they signed out or other things, this would allow you to actually get the user back into a signed in state and then continue along with the flow. This will also provide, you'll see the use a different account element, which if you're familiar with passkeys, very similar, right? Use a different device, kind of similar patterns here. That would allow you to actually select an account that doesn't have an existing session. So this is in the process of, this is in the origin trial process. So you can actually, 125 is what, in beta now? Anyway, we can put the link to that. But so you can actually start playing around with this to essentially provide a nice UX to get the user a session. All right. The continuation API. This one is probably the most flexible, right? So the idea here is, the user clicks on continue as Tim, and you need the user to do something, right? Like whether it could be reauth with a passkey, it could be accept a new grant, it could be anything that you might want to interrupt the user to do. This essentially provides a programmatic way to initiate a pop-up that is bound to that FedCM flow and return the user back through the flow when it's done, right? So this is super flexible. The hardest thing about this one was coming up with a name because it's so flexible. It's like the third name, and we think this is probably the winner because it seems to explain what it does. But this one's very exciting, and this is also in origin trials, and you can start playing with this today. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time, but the very, very quick 5-10-second summary is you may be able to auto grant storage access when the user goes through FedCM. So that's an example of like when the browser is aware of a flow, other things may be able to be relaxed, right? You don't get a scary prompt. So we know there's a link at the top in the deck as well. That's an ongoing effort as well, but I don't think we're gonna have time today. All right, so new topic since OSW, as I mentioned, we presented this. One of the things literally the same week as OSW, as the feedback came in, was, one of the questions was, how do I pass extra parameters from the relying party to the assertion endpoint, because I need context, I need RP specific data, whatever it may be. And so this is currently being discussed in issue 556 that you can take a look at. And the idea here is to just add a params object that you can pass key value pairs in, and your IDP code can evaluate that before it issues a token. So that should add a lot of flexibility. If you think that's valuable, definitely, if you could participate in that discussion in 556, that would be super helpful. Yeah, maybe we should, Hans.
Philip, go ahead.
I think Hannes went into queue before me.
Sorry. I think Hannes was there at the beginning.
All right, I wasn't paying attention. Sorry.
Okay.
Just one quick thing for this. What I found this parameter assertion passing to the assertion endpoint to be the most useful for, at least in my very limited testing when it actually didn't crash the browser. Sorry, Sam. Was in combination with the continuation sort of an API. So this allowed the relying party to define even authorization parameters barring multiple resource servers, because the API doesn't support it at the moment. You can only pass string and a string object. And then as the browser is hitting the assertion endpoint, at that point, you just say, I don't have enough information, and you can open your standard consent prompt, and you can have the user consent to all the authorization information. This can contain RAR. This can contain a lot of things. The thing that I found especially jarring here is that the result of all of this is still just a single token. It's called token, and it's a string where, to be honest, I just want to return my standard token endpoint response and not be bound by a structure. And I feel like that's going to be one of the questions at the end.
Yep. All right, you can go to the next slide. All right, before I jump into this, you can leave it there, it's fine. So there's a couple of issues that have come in, like right after OSW, there was all these awesome issues that came in, but they haven't necessarily been discussed in the group yet. One of them is like, how can we solve kind of this multilateral federation problem with FedSAM, right? Like, could we, the idea of using any for the config URL, could that be a OpenID Connect Federation URL as one example, right? So there's a bunch of, I would say, big topics that came out of OSW that will continue to be discussed in the CG. And I see Erwin presented one of his PhD papers at OSW, and it all kind of lined up, right? We had this like, oh, maybe FedCM could be used for that. I think in the call out in the paper was like, what if we had a web API? It's like, well, we did. So I definitely stay tuned. There's a bunch of issues I believe that Erwin and others opened. So lots of opportunity there to kind of solve the IDP selection problem for large federations. So just wanted to do a quick mention of that. Real quick, because I do want to save time for questions. Just real quick, right? The intersection with passkeys and digital credentials, these dialogues might look kind of similar, right? It's very similar styling to passkeys. I think one of the visions for all this, right, is the ability to create an account, maybe using claims from FedCM, then sever the connection with the IDP, right? Like I actually don't want the IDP to know that I signed in everywhere. And the result of that is actually I create a passkey. The passkey has context from the ID token passed via FedCM, and then the user ends up with a local account on the RP with a set of claims from Federation and a passkey for signing in from then on out. All right, so this is one kind of vision of what all this could become. You could also replace, sorry, go to the next slide. I think this slide was, sorry, I'm not used to seeing my own. Yeah, so if you think about claims and an ID token and claims that are going to come from a mobile driver's license or a verifiable credential, they're pretty similar, right? You can get age over 21 from a lot of IDPs today just as a claim and an ID token. So this all starts to kind of mesh together into like, maybe the user should choose what they're comfortable sharing from what source, right? Like if you just need a low assurance age over whatever proof, like not legally binding even, let's say, then maybe it's okay that it comes from the IDP instead of a government issued ID, because your organization doesn't want to deal with requesting a government issued ID, right? So there's a lot of flexibility in these. They are separate interfaces and all this stuff there, but it can be converged into user agent UI to make all this a little bit more clean. Go ahead and skip. So yeah, go ahead and skip that. All right, so the last slide, one more. So Hannes, to your point, the OSW is kind of the kickoff of the FedCM World Tour on starting to get folks engaged and see what work is actually needed to make this coexist in other spaces. If you haven't been following the digital credentials work, right? So that is a very similar API, web platform API, that will essentially support existing paradigms like OpenID for VP, right? So if we think of OpenID for VP to the Digital Credentials API, we can think of OpenID Connect to the FedCM API, right? So what that means, though, is we need to define a profile of how it's supposed to operate over that API, right? Like what parameters are no longer needed, right? Anything relating to redirects don't apply anymore, for example. What multiple folks have now mentioned around like token, right? Like we probably need to wrap some more semantics around that. So that's kind of, it's a bit of an open question, right? My hypothesis, we need to create at a minimum an OpenID Connect binding for FedCM, like a profile, which is a smaller version that says if you're going to use FedCM, here's how OpenID Connect works over it, here's the required parameters, here's et cetera. But the question then becomes, right, like where is the intersection with OAuth for authorization that's not OpenID Connect, right? This currently does not deal with access token, refresh token acquisition. But if you take a look at the full deck, you'll see, maybe there's a chance that things like a silent token refresh and an iframe that does use third-party cookies can now work because the user went through FedCM and storage access is granted. So we have to I personally don't want to jump into assuming that we have to do all the OAuth stuff in FedCM. I want to see where the line is of like by having the user go through FedCM for sign-in, what do we unlock? And then backtracking and saying, okay, this we didn't unlock this. Maybe we do need some help from the web platform to unlock those cases, right? So that's the big open question, and kind of what OSW in this presentation is hoping to kind of start up.
Hannes.
Yeah, it appears to me that like if the browsers are already making all these changes, which should probably should have been made maybe 15 years ago already, but then one could easily see how this would also apply to OAuth, not just OpenID Connect with some of the more identity-based driven flows.
Yeah, so I think that would be, I guess a call to action, and I also want to help drive it, right? Is like, how can we start the conversation of looking at like making sure everyone's on the same page of how FedCM works today, what's coming, because I know this was a very quick, it was already shortened by 15 minutes, so sorry about that. This is a very quick dump, and then go into, hopefully we can spend some time in Vancouver. That was why we timed this way, to actually maybe start mapping out like what could the web platform help with here, pain points, security challenges, all the things we've been band-aiding over the years because there was no other way. So.
Okay. Hannes, any follow-up? No. Okay. Anybody else have questions, comments? Brock.
Hi, hello. I haven't looked into the details of the APIs you're providing here, but my first thought is I have a lot of customers building server rendered web applications who, let's just say they have no JavaScript in them whatsoever. So I'm curious, my mechanics and my brain are wondering, is the nonce in the initial parameter the secure correlation mechanism to establish a server-side session in the relying party based on all this stuff that's being pushed into JavaScript into the browser? Sort of my first part question. The second part then is, are you guys keeping in mind some of the recommendations for the OAuth for browser-based applications, where a BFF pattern, a server-side session pattern to keep tokens and refresh tokens out of JavaScript Are those being kept in mind as you guys are going forward with some of this future work?
Those are all exactly the kind of things we want to start bubbling up, right? Because I would say FedCM today is really targeted at the people who need quick, easy, frictionless sign in with just an ID token. They're not even requesting an access token, right? Like signing into the New York Times with Twitter or LinkedIn or Google, right? Like those very, very basic use cases. So this is kind of I think the next phase where we need to start addressing all these other use cases and making sure they're compatible. So absolutely all that is fair game, and those are good calls.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Brock. Giuseppe.
Hey guys, ciao team, ciao Sam. It's great to see you here today. Thank you for the presentation. I have to admit that sorry for this. Well, in the Gulf field, we brought implicit flow and tokens through the user agent out from the picture. And at the same time, FedCM seems to bring it again. This doesn't reduce my curiosity about this technology. That it seems really important and impactful. Well, at the end, I realized that, well, I have to do my homework, and at the same time, there will be some changes to leave by delegating to the certified wallet instance to handle stuff, taking out tokens and verifiable credential from a direct representation through the user agent. So I believe that we really need to investigate more about the role of a certified entity to do some relevant stuffs out of the responsibility and direct handling of the user agent. So, well, this is not a question, but I'm starting from this. So do you have some information, some insight about this?
In the context of like a connect like flow, what would the certified entity be in that case, besides like a certified OP?
Well, just to give you an example, in the IDAS regulation, we have a legal requirement that is also consolidated by the architectural reference framework that is not normative at this stage, but it will be when it will be enforced by the implementing act. That forces the relying party to establish a sort of a mutual authentication between the wallet instance and the relying party in a way that the relying party must be sure that the party that it is interacting with is certified, it's secure, and stuff like that. At the same time, the user agent would be something like a media where the information passed through just to create a binding with the user session to the relying party, while the presentation would be made by the certified entity, the so-called certified wallet instance. At the same time, there may be some encryption to be sure that the user agent doesn't access to personal information. We, in the Gulf field, we are pretty concerned about the privacy risks about making personal information in plain text through the user agent.
Yeah, so specifically with wallets, right? So that's all being discussed as part of the digital credential API, not FedCM, right? So like the response encryption is supported via that mechanism. There's currently a discussion around like should that API require encryption, or should it be like OpenID for VP that requires it? That would be. I guess are you saying that we need something similar for like a connect flow via FedCM, or is that specific to wallets?
Well, the point probably, sorry for my ignorance in this field, but probably the point is that all about trust establishment should be handled out from the user agent. And I think that we will continue working with TLS within the user agent without any problem. While there might be some other aspects about the data provided, exposure of personal data through the user agent, and additional things that I have to investigate. So thank you for your time, and sorry for my ignorance.
No, it's all good. These APIs are so close that we have to, like, if we started these both at the same time, they'd probably be the same. So.
Okay, thanks, Giuseppe. Hannes.
I guess I move it to the mailing list discussion or follow-up discussion. Also, Mike's question will also need to be answered there. Of course, like this is a new topic, so there's a lot of thoughts that need to go into this. So I think benefit of the time we still have left, I guess it's a kickstart of a discussion and not by any means the end of it.
Yeah, that was the goal. Yep. Based on the questions, it seems like people are interested in continuing the conversation. So that's a good sign for me.
Okay, awesome. Brian, do you have a quick question? I see you entered the queue, and do you want to quickly ask a question? We can't hear you, Brian? Okay. Okay, I think thank you guys. This is really good. So great update here, and hopefully this is just the beginning of this discussion. And I think we need to talk about this in Vancouver too. So get ready, guys, to have more discussion about this. But feel free, obviously, to kind of engage on the mailing list and continue that discussion. And hopefully, we'll see you in Vancouver.
All right, awesome. Thank you for having us.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye. Thanks, guys.